Welcome to my quarantine odyssey from Europe to the US, a journey through 4 airports, 3 flights, 2 nights sleeping in airports, 1 US custom lines, 1 missed connection, and too many snacks to count. My intrepid voyage of discovery began Friday the 13th, when my shared residence announced the new policy that anyone who had traveled outside of Ireland in the last 14 days needed to self-quarantine for 2 weeks. So my adventures abroad had turned into an eviction from home. So instead of an $800 Airbnb for 2 weeks, I opted to spend the same amount of money to fly back to the US. Little did I know just how badly I would feel the ban, aka the EU travel ban. Unable to go home, my manager sent pictures of everything in my room back in Dublin, which is a lot for a hoarder and a charity shop fanatic like myself. They then packed my bags and met me at the airport with all of my items I'd asked for and snacks for the journey. Night 1 in the Dublin airport began. So on Friday at 10 a.m. I was told about the policy, and by Saturday at 8 a.m. I was on a flight. I will say on coronavirus awareness, Dublin Airport is winning my vote. They had tables with staff members passing out flyers and answering any questions about COVID-19. The staff were doing their best to promote social distancing, but when an Irish man is ready for a wee chat about coronavirus gossip, social distancing is the last thing on your mind, as I could tell as he kept scooting closer to her and she kept scooting back. So don't forget, they say the Irish people drink too much, but it's only because they thirst for proximity. Dublin Airport had posters hanging every few feet. They updated those posters at 1 a.m. prime poster updating time, with new rules asking anyone with any symptoms to stay at home, even if they hadn't traveled within the last 14 days. They also had the best hand washing posters around at the Dublin Airport. From Dublin Airport, I flew to Frankfurt. Germany has the most cases in Europe, behind Italy and Spain, yet there was far less signage and none of the airport staff were wearing gloves or masks. So if you're looking for a Frankfurter with a side of COVID-19, Frankfurt is the place to be. Between these 2 airports, no one asked any questions regarding health or recent travels, despite going through security and passport checks in the different locations. Flight number 2 was Frankfurt to Chicago. The flight was almost 100% Americans, and the Americans surprisingly wore far fewer masks than Europeans. I definitely expected more Americans to be panicked in German airport. The flight was filled with study abroad students who had to end their courses early, and the biggest shock of all was there were a lot of elderly people. This one completely baffles me, of all people traveling through international airports and going through customs lines. I didn't think elderly people needed to be there. I guess when I realized things were really bad was when even the Mormon missionaries were fleeing back to the US to escape coronavirus. Flash forward 9.5 hours of viewing of Frozen 2, and we've arrived in Chicago Airport, America. The landing announcement briefly warned to expect longer than normal custom lines due to coronavirus screening. Understatement of the year. What they should have said is that the line was so long it was already developing in its own culture, books had been written as people had passed a lifetime shuffling forward slowly, a new religion had emerged, histories of the line were being circulated to those who just joined, hushed folk tales of what could possibly at the end of the line entertain children during the long night spent waiting to move just one step closer. Everyone in the line knew of someone who had escaped, who had broken the frontiers of this existence. But such tales are dismissed as heresy by the line elders. I mean, that would have been a bit more accurate than lines have been extended due to coronavirus screening. And here commenced the true tribulation, the place where my feet grew weary, my stomach groaned with hunger, and quite honestly, my face mask began to itch, and the germs of coronavirus felt more real than ever before. The overall consensus of everyone in the customs lines was that if you didn't have a coronavirus when you landed in the US, by the end of customs, you most definitely would. Walking to customs, I was met with a wall of people, which was whittled into miles of lines running up the hall and down the hall and up the hall again, looping back and forming zigzags throughout 3 hallways in the customs waiting area. None of us knew what was happening as we quietly filled in customs papers and a travel history form, and we were told that the process, as it was ominously named, was required and that the wait time was unknown. An officer soothed our souls as he spoke of the freedoms of America and the return to the motherland, the assurance that we were no longer abroad. Yet how could we be soothed in the hot room filled with thousands of citizens with an impeding temperature check? No one wanted to fail, so everyone quickly started stripping off their jackets, their hoodies, and doing their best to keep their temperatures down. Throughout this 5-hour process, I passed 1 bathroom, 0 chairs, and no hand sanitizers. Meanwhile, I kept company by interacting with my line neighbor, who I found out was an alumnus of my alma mater, Arizona State, who had been playing basketball in none other than Milan, Italy, the epicenter of the coronavirus. The ideal person to stand next to in times of coronavirus. And the biggest shock to me was that she was also standing next to 4 elderly missionaries, and the pregnant were stuck with a lot of us as well. Little done to reduce their exposure risk, so maybe in the future coronavirus screenings should separate those that are at high risk. So after 1 line where a customs officer wrote 3 red letters on my form and shared that 12,000 international passengers were arriving to ORD that Saturday, another line where it was asked my address and my travel history and my phone number, and I finally reached the coronavirus screening, where I was asked about my travel history, my symptoms, and my temperature was checked, and I was given a quarantine log. All of which took 3 minutes in total. So after 5 hours in lines with thousands of people, 1 minute with the first officer, 2 minutes with the second officer, and 3 minutes being screened, I was free to grab my bag and catch my connecting flight. Except I left 2 hours before. I will say those doing the screening for coronavirus were very open to recommendations and concerns, so if you've gone through customs, feel free to send them your feedback. So I was open to sharing that they definitely needed hand sanitizers and hand wipes and chairs for elderly and pregnant people along the journey. So reach out to your local coronavirus team to let them know how they can improve. Grabbing my bag from the lineup of thousands of suitcases and the baggage claim, I headed to the United Service desk to spend another hour rebooking my flight for 10 a.m. the next morning, getting 2 $10 food vouchers, 1 for dinner and 1 for breakfast, and a discount for a hotel. At this point, I didn't want to really deal with thousands of people fighting insecurity in the next morning, so began my second night of sleeping in the airport, fueled by an $11 Starbucks sandwich before going to sleep. I'm proud to say I was one of the first 5 people through Chicago security at 3:30 a.m. Able to get myself an all-American welcome home breakfast from Chili's, so I scarfed down pancakes, bacon, and eggs, and was soon on my jam-packed flight of 29 people heading home. Interestingly enough, the flight attendant told me this was his biggest flight of the week, with the rest of his flights having 10, maybe 15 people in them max. Landing at home, I was the only human wearing a face mask, and probably, or at least I hope, the only one who'd been wearing their socks for the past 59 hours, lost their toothbrush on Friday night, and hadn't showered in 4 days. Pretty sure they could all smell that I was coming from a far and distant land. Also, Murphy says hello, and that he's already tired of quarantine after the first 30 hours. At the airport, I was greeted by my mother, who was wearing gloves, a face mask personalized with a smiley face. It was more terrifying than welcoming, and a car seat covered in a plastic tablecloth so I wouldn't infect her cars. She also brought an extra pair of gloves for me.
Mask, Victoria, so you don't have to. The windows down so you can get some fresh air, and if you have any germs, they go out the window.
My mother has picked me up from the airport, and I am to self-quarantine for 2 weeks. So she has picked me up, so I'm sitting on a plastic seat cover wearing gloves. She's got her mask and her gloves on. I'm not allowed to touch anything with my hands. Got a nice little mark from wearing my mask for my international flights through 6 hours of custom lines and overnight and flights again today. So long journey to this warm greeting of quarantine behavior from my mother.
You've got water. I give you some water.
But for now, thanks for joining me on my journey from Europe to the US. The coronavirus ban is much more than just a ban. It teaches resilience, patience, tolerance. It's an experience, a journey, an odyssey that I recommend everyone take a part of. Thanks for listening.